She took my business cards from the table and discarded them in front of her family as if they were a Reed shopping receipt. "Nobody cares, Ellison," they chuckled. Her mother tried to hide it with her hand, while Wren clapped slowly like applauding a joke. Darcy stood there, wearing a smile I hadn't seen in years around me, triumphant and satisfied. It was the grin of someone who had been waiting a long time for this moment. I remained still, silent, seated at the Thanksgiving table in a house that no longer felt familiar, surrounded by people who had formed their opinions about me before I even entered. And I allowed the situation to unfold because the truth they didn't realize was that I stopped justifying myself to those who had already determined my identity long ago. What transpired afterward, when Uncle Bertram, Darcy's uncle, reached into that bin, extracted one of the cards, and truly read it, left an indelible impression on me. I shall never forget the hush that fell over the room, nor the crash of his wine glass against the floor, nor the look he gave me, a look I couldn't immediately decipher, as if he had just discovered himself standing in the wrong place at the wrong moment in time. He queried, "Is this title genuine?" And that question shattered everything. Yet to fully grasp what unfolded at that Thanksgiving table, one must comprehend the 4 years preceding it. One must understand the price a man pays for keeping his identity hidden. And one must appreciate why, sometimes, the most potent action in a room filled with people who have underestimated you is to do absolutely nothing. I am Ellison Ward, aged 44. I'm a neurosurgeon at Houston Methodist Hospital within the Texas Medical Center, one of the globe's biggest medical centers, a fact that held no weight in Beaumont, Texas, where my wife's kin evaluated a man by his ability to discuss football passionately and grill brisket without assistance. For years, I refrained from disclosing my profession at social gatherings, not due to embarrassment or pride. This decision stemmed from an incident during my residency when informing a woman about my choice of neurosurgery led her to alter her expression, not with admiration, but with doubt, followed by a feigned politeness that left me feeling more distant than if she'd ignored me completely. People either started behaving in an overly formal manner, as though I were their teacher, or they began treating every headache as a tumor, asking for my diagnosis during hors d'oeuvres. I learned to respond with "I work in medicine," and that was it. If pressed further, I said surgery. Whenever they continued, I found an excuse to take a sip of my drink. Darcy knew my profession as we met during my fellowship. She worked at St. Luke's as an administrator, and our acquaintance stemmed from a mutual colleague at a conference in Austin. Sharp, organized, and with a rare knack for listening attentively, she was the one I dated for a year. I popped the question at Barton Creek Greenbelt, near the water, a place she'd mentioned only once as her favorite spot on Earth. She accepted my proposal before I finished speaking. "I'm sharing this to make it clear that I didn't blindly rush into marriage with Darcy. I believed I knew her, and for the first 2 years I wasn't proven wrong. She was the person I thought she was." Then something changed subtly. That's the nature of a dying marriage. It often happens gradually. Instead of one earthquake, it's been continuous minor quakes you've been brushing aside due to your affection for the person, recalling their past, and fearing the prospect of starting anew at age 41, which feels like confessing a failure unsuitable for written expression. The rift began with work. Neurosurgery is not a profession that makes life easy for your partner. I appreciate this. The hours are grueling. I've missed birthdays, anniversary dinners, and even cut short a Colorado vacation due to an emergency case. I'm aware of the toll on those close to me, never concealing it. But Darcy sought not just comprehension, but an audience. In our 3rd year of marriage, she began visiting Beaumont more frequently, initially once a month, then every other weekend. Upon her return from these trips, she carried an unusual energy, a sort of unease that wasn't present when she departed. Pamela, my mother, communicated solely through comparisons, making every conversation feel like a competition. Her neighbor's son becoming a partner and her church friend's daughter marrying a home builder in Lufkin constantly hinted that my life was falling short. Despite my attempts to be understanding, it was hard not to resent Pamela for never showing genuine interest in my life after 4 years. The business cards were Darcy's idea, an action that still puzzles me. I had been invited to deliver a keynote speech at a neurosurgery conference in New Orleans, the annual meeting of the Southern Neurosurgical Society, a prestigious event in the field. For 3 months, I had been preparing a presentation on minimally invasive brainstem tumor approaches, as suggested by Ockhafer. The conference materials were ready. My name, title, position as attending neurosurgeon and director of minimally invasive neurosurgery at Houston Methodist, along with contact details. Darcy noticed them in my home office and requested a few to show her family during Thanksgiving, presenting it as something she was proud of. However, I should have been more cautious, as pride from Darcy, during that phase of our marriage, often concealed complex underlying emotions. I agreed. Of course I said yes. Even after 4 years, I wanted to believe my wife remained on my side. It's important to introduce Bertram before recounting the incident involving the wine glass, as he played a significant role in this story that I didn't fully comprehend until that moment. Bertram Holloway was Darcy's mother's older brother, and his presence would prove relevant in ways I didn't understand until a fateful encounter with a wine glass. 67 years old on Thanksgiving, Bertram exuded a mature air of unimpressibility from experiencing the world extensively. He had spent 22 years working in oil platforms in the Gulf of Mexico until an incident in 1998 resulted in a spinal injury that significantly altered his life's trajectory. Now he walked with a cane. He seldom discussed the mishap. Darcy's kin viewed it like weather, acknowledged but not scrutinized. Our previous encounters were limited, and we barely exchanged words. Bertram was taciturn in boisterous gatherings, which I misjudged as just being shy rather than vigilant. I didn't fully grasp his struggles or his insight into what the business cards symbolized, not until the wine glass shattered. If this narrative resonates with you, particularly if you've experienced being judged before entering a gathering, click subscribe and hit the bell for notifications. Share a time when someone underestimated you in the comments below. I read all comments diligently. Give this video a thumbs up if you wish to hear more about what ensued after that Thanksgiving dinner at the Holloway residence, an event I've never fully disclosed before, not even to Okafor, who contacted me later that night. The Holloway house, a 4-bedroom colonial in Sunset Terrace, a neighborhood 15 minutes from downtown, was as expected, but unfortunately not something I grew fond of. The backyard was spacious enough for the family to lounge on lawn chairs following the meal. Each year, Pamela hosted it. She had been conducting it since before Darcy's birth, and the entire gathering assumed an air of a refined ritual she had mastered. It was not for comfort, but for showmanship. The table accommodated 14 guests. A children's section was set up at the portable table in the kitchen, implying that I sat with the grown-ups, sandwiched between Darcy and her cousin Tiffany, a 31-year-old marketing manager from Dallas who spent most of dinner detailing her apartment renovation as if it were a full-length documentary. Darcy's father, Gerald, was a former insurance adjuster who communicated his views through an intricate network of sighs and pauses. He had never been openly aggressive towards me. He had also never shown any open emotions. For 4 years, our longest chat spanned 11 minutes, centered on the Houston Texans' offensive line, a topic I had researched prior to that specific family gathering, reflecting my unsuccessful attempts to find acceptance in an environment that never fully welcomed me. Darcy's younger sibling, Wren, was 28 and worked in real estate in Beaumont. She was the type of individual who expressed opinions about everyone with the conviction of someone who had never been challenged for being incorrect. She formed her opinion of me as too serious early in my relationship with Darcy, which essentially meant I lacked the required level of warmth according to her preferences. I had come to terms with this long ago. What I hadn't reconciled was her using Darcy as an audience, the way sisters sometimes do, one performing for the other laughing slightly too long, forming a private language that gradually left everyone else in the room behind. That was who sat at the table when Darcy grabbed my business cards. Earlier in the evening, I'd placed them nearby my plate with the intention of giving some to Gerald, who had once mentioned casually about having a friend dealing with neurological issues. A casual gesture, nothing more, but Darcy noticed them first, and something that I can only describe as opportunistic crossed her face. She picked up the stack of cards, around 12 in number, and raised them. "See what Ellison brought," she said, using a particular inflection suggesting a joke was imminent, which should have alerted me. Pamela looked over from the other end of the table. "What are those?" Darcy placed them on the table as if offering proof. "He carries them everywhere, including Thanksgiving." Tiffany chuckled first, followed by Wren, then a heavier man in his 40s, whose name I didn't know, laughing along because they seemed to be part of an unspoken alliance I hadn't been informed about. "Well, that certainly fits your image, Ellison," Wren remarked, using a tone that made a statement sound like a compliment but functioned neither as a compliment nor a statement. Gerald sighed one of his frequent sighs. Pamela smiled patiently and generously. "Sweetheart, we're family. You don't need to network during Thanksgiving." And it was then that Darcy picked up the stack of cards, hovering them over the small decorative trash bin near the buffet table where Pamela kept it for disposing cocktail napkins, and dropped them in. "Nobody cares about that, Ellison." The laughter followed quickly, not all of it malicious. Some were merely responses to societal cues, but Darcy's laughter stood out. It carried a sense of release, as if she had been eagerly anticipating it. I remained motionless. I have executed brain surgery on patients fully aware, requiring me to exercise precise control over my hands, speech, respiration. In surgical theaters, where one misstep could determine whether someone leaves the hospital walking or not, I am versed in stillness. I can disregard surrounding noise. Thus I remained still. I lifted my water glass. I took a sip. Yet I uttered nothing. On the other side of the table, Bertram was seated, distant near the window, unaffected by laughter. He was observing me with an expression I couldn't decipher yet, cautious and vigilant, like one weighing the pros and cons of a decision. Without uttering a sound, he set aside his fork, scooted back from the table slightly, and plucked one of the business cards from the ornamental wastebasket. No one noticed instantly. The discussion had progressed. Tiffany was discussing the texture she desired for her backsplash, while Wren suggested subway tile, and Bertram remained silent, engrossed in the card. He read it as if perusing something of great importance. I observed. His jaw stiffened. I witnessed an emotion shift across his face that I still cannot clearly define. Not shock, rather a sense of familiarity. He looked at me. The wine glass was clutched in his right hand. Unaware, he had loosened his grip. It tumbled and struck the edge of his plate before shattering on the floor. The sound pierced Tiffany's anecdote, much like a blaring fire alarm, causing everyone to turn their attention. Bertram displayed his business card, speaking softly, which drew people closer. "Is this title genuine?" he questioned, pausing for a moment. What I failed to mention earlier is that Bertram had been concealing something for 9 years. This revelation didn't occur to me at the Thanksgiving dinner table. Instead, it was disclosed later when the dishes were cleared, and most of the family moved to the living room. At this point, Bertram requested a private conversation with me, speaking with a directness that mirrored serious individuals seeking authentic information. We headed to Gerald's study, which bore the scent of old magazines and an overworked dehumidifier for the climate. Bertram seated himself in the leather chair by the window. He placed the business card on the armrest of the chair, face up, as if he needed to continually view it. It was there that he disclosed the 1998 accident. 60 miles offshore in the Gulf, during a maintenance procedure, a pressure valve malfunctioned and triggered an explosion, causing him to collide with a steel conduit. He endured a compression fracture at C5 to C6. Airlifted by helicopter to a hospital in New Orleans, they conducted emergency surgery to stabilize the fracture and alleviate spinal cord pressure. Despite recovery, he retained partial ability, exhibiting full arm and hand function but some residual weakness in his left leg, persistent pain managed through medication and determination, and a gait requiring a cane for 26 years. 9 years ago, however, new symptoms emerged: increased weakness, tremors in his left hand, intermittent pressure-like sensations behind his eyes, and periodic episodes akin to eye strain. For 9 years, he had been secretly dealing with a neurological issue that required specialized revision spinal surgery, as discovered by a neurologist in Beaumont and later confirmed by a neurosurgeon in Houston. They identified a syrinx, a fluid-filled cavity forming within his spinal cord, at the site of an old injury. Although manageable for now, the long-term outlook was unclear due to complexities arising from earlier surgical hardware. He needed a surgeon with specific expertise in this area. Despite this prolonged struggle, he hadn't shared this with his family because he didn't want them to perceive him as a managed individual or someone's project, fearing they might organize meals around his health situation before he fully comprehended the medical implications. He had been placing phone calls, writing letters, receiving referrals leading to further referrals, encountering obstacles such as unaffordable specialists or trips to consultations in Dallas and Houston that ended with being referred to more specialized professionals due to his complex case. Then, at a Thanksgiving table, he noticed a discarded business card, and the title on it, Director of Minimally Invasive Neurosurgery, was precisely the subspecialty he'd been searching for. He looked at me over the study and asked, "How long have you been practicing this?" I replied, "I've had 14 years of training and 11 years in practice." He said, "The syrinx is located between C5 and C6. There's old posterior hardware from 1998. Everyone I've consulted says it's complicated." I agreed, stating, "It is indeed complex, but complex does not mean impossible." There was a brief silence. Then he stated, "Your deck of cards is now in the trash." "Indeed," he replied. "I foresee I'll have to ask for your help," I responded. "Elaborate on the medical imaging you mentioned." I chose honesty with you regarding my marriage situation at that moment because this tale isn't merely about Bertram. It has always been more than just about him. The journey home from Beaumont took 45 minutes on I-10 east into Houston, and Darcy and I remained silent for the initial 30 of those minutes. I could sense her waiting for me to address the incident at the table, either to express hurt to provide a point of contention or to feign unconcern, which would give her something to brush aside. I disclosed. "Bertram requested a meeting as his doctor." She glanced over. "What?" "He sustained a spinal cord complication from his accident. He requires a surgical consultation." She conveyed an expression I couldn't quite decipher in the car's dimness. It could have been embarrassment or something else complex. "You should have told my family what you do," she remarked. "At any point during the past 4 years, you decided not to. You know why I didn't. Because you believe we're not worthy of it." That was an almost perfect misunderstanding. For a brief instant, I even entertained this notion, examined it, and dismissed it. "Because I didn't want to be a label to your family," I explained. "I wanted to be a person. I never got the chance to discover if that was feasible." She remained silent. The headlights streaked across the windshield. My phone vibrated on the console. "Ah, Kaffer." I allowed it to reach voicemail, then called him back when we returned home after she had gone upstairs. My department head, Akafer, was one of the rare individuals who resided beyond the sphere of my domestic life. Raised in Lagos and trained at Johns Hopkins, he exuded an unwavering tranquility bred from years of confronting critical situations. He phoned to verify my schedule for the New Orleans conference, and when I shared in passing what transpired during Thanksgiving, only noting a potential patient encounter, he inquired, "Ellison, are you okay?" I responded, "I'm fine." He countered, "That's not what I asked." Following our call, I sat alone in the dimly lit kitchen for some time. The house was still. Houston, in late November, exhibited its unique almost winter chill, a temperature dip sufficient to be felt but not substantial enough to signify a true season. His face as he read the card remained obscure, though I later recognized it. It was the countenance of one who'd grappled with a mystery amidst darkness, grown so attuned to the void that even the prospect of illumination seemed distant. On Monday, I reached out to Bertram, asking him to meet in my office at Houston Methodist Neuroscience Center on our main campus within the Texas Medical Center. His solitary drive from Beaumont revealed his self-reliance. Upon arrival, he laid before me a dossier, spanning 9 years of imaging data, surgical reports, summaries of consultations, and communications with 4 neurosurgeons. He arranged these materials with the measured care of one who has long managed chaos in his own life. 40 minutes were spent scrutinizing the materials prior to speaking. He remained still as I perused. There was no idle chatter or distressing inquiries. He simply embodied a man aware that his best course of action at present was to step aside and allow me to carry on. The scenario corresponded precisely with his description. Post-traumatic syringomyelic at C5 to C6, overlaid on a foundation of anterior and posterior instrumentation from the 1998 stabilization surgery. The syrinx had noticeably increased in the recent imaging series. The new neurological symptoms, the tremor, the weakness, the pressure surges, aligned with the compression of the cord due to the expanding cavity. This was not a simple case. The original hardware imposed limitations on what I could reach and how, but there was a route. 17 times in my career, I've implemented a particular method, minimally invasive posterior revision with syrinx drainage through a specialized catheter technique, in similar post-instrumentation cases. The results were satisfactory. I laid it all out for him directly and candidly. Bertram didn't require information to be handled gently. He could take the facts as they came at the level of respect he was worthy of receiving them. After a brief pause, he asked, "Can you repair it?" I replied, "I can halt its deterioration, and there's a strong possibility we restore some of what you've lost over the last 2 years. I can't guarantee a return to 1997, but I can improve upon your current condition." He gave a single nod. "When?" I said. "Let me put you into our scheduling system and have the tumor board review it for evaluation. 4 to 6 weeks. We both stood up, shook hands over my desk, and then he made an unexpected move. He examined the framed diplomas hanging on the wall beyond me, displaying his undergraduate degree from Rice University, medical degree from Baylor College of Medicine, fellowship certificate from UPMC, and he commented, "Despite your lifelong endeavors, they remain unaware of who you are." I responded, "No," he replied, "it's their oversight." At the time, I was at a loss for words and didn't respond. 6 weeks later, I conducted a posterior cervical revision with syrinx to subarachnoid shunting on Bertram Holloway at Houston Methodist Hospital. The procedure lasted 4 hours and 11 minutes. My resident, third-year Kayla Briggs, who had the most stable hands I'd worked with in the past decade, aided me. The angle was constricted. The outdated hardware offered us an opening of precisely the width I had calculated. In a specific moment, approximately 2 hours into the procedure, I had to swiftly decide on the catheter's placement angle, an action demanding the same focused serenity as previously described. Successfully executed, we proceeded. That evening found Bertram in the neuro ICU, and upon visiting him the next morning, his left hand was resting on the bed rail, exhibiting no tremor. His gaze shifted from his hand to mine, words unnecessary between us. I will recount for you a phone call from Darcy that came 3 days later. She had been informed by her mother, who in turn learned from Bertram, who disclosed his predicament after the surgery, its duration, and his search for the surgeon, which occurred at a Thanksgiving table when his niece discarded the man's business cards in the trash. Darcy called on a Wednesday evening as I was wrapping up my office work. "Mom told me about Bertram," she said. After a lengthy silence, "He's recovering well," was uttered. A pause followed. "Ellison, I wasn't aware. You didn't inquire." Another moment of quietness. "I owe you an apology." Now I want to be candid because the narrative becomes more intricate than a typical redemption arc. Darcy was right about my need for an apology. However, at that precise juncture, 4 years after the onset of our estrangement, and following a particularly embarrassing incident in front of her kin, such an apology was entwined within the broader dilemma of what our connection signified, and whether either of us still perceived it as identical. I responded, "Darcy, I believe we should discuss matters beyond Bertram." The subsequent dialogue stretched over nearly 2 hours, delving into territory we had shied away from for years. I won't disclose every specific, as certain parts are meant only for us, but I will reveal that by the conversation's end, we had each spoken truths and hardships that couldn't be undone. Over 10 years ago, we got married in Austin on a Saturday in April, but our marriage's ending wasn't what either of us anticipated. My divorce attorney is Nadine Cortez, based in Midtown Houston on Westthamer, who specializes in high-value domestic cases with surgical precision. Direct, meticulous, and devoid of comforting words about the situation, she was a perfect fit for my needs. The process took 8 months, devoid of explosions or drama. It was simply two individuals running out of shared purpose, formally documenting this reality in legal terms. In June, our River Oaks home went up for sale. I relocated to an apartment in the medical center area, conveniently close to the hospital for my early morning walks on healthy days, which I took and found beneficial. 4 months post-surgery, Bertram visited for a follow-up consultation. Arriving at the clinic independently from Beaumont, he walked without his cane, an observation I made, but chose not to draw attention to, considering his 26-year struggle with physical constraints. The imaging revealed his syrinx remained stable, and the cord decompression was successful. His left-hand tremor had vanished, leg weakness showed significant improvement on standardized tests, and pain levels decreased by approximately 60%. These results were encouraging, representing goals pursued diligently during training. He inquired about my well-being, to which I responded briefly about the divorce, mirroring his matter-of-fact tone when discussing his injury. There was a moment of silence before he expressed concern that his sister's family would find the news difficult. I replied, "That's for them and Darcy to handle." He acknowledged this with a nod. "What has been on your mind since surgery?" I inquired. "The time she discarded those cards," he replied. "I believed it was a casual family affair. You know, the way we sometimes play roles for each other. I didn't think much of it." He glanced at his left hand, flexing it. However, its importance became significant later on. I stated, "Bertram, you would have found someone else, as you are quite tenacious. You would have found a way." He looked at me with the same expression I had seen at the Thanksgiving table when he read the card, and now I could identify it. It was the look of someone who has learned not to rely on anything and has just been given something they didn't account for. "Perhaps," he said, "but you were the one. I want to explain why I'm sharing this story with you, because it's not a tale I would have shared 3 years ago, nor will I share it 3 years from now, but it's the truth for me right now. For years, I concealed my true self within this marriage, not due to shame, but rather as a choice made early on to be recognized for who I am, rather than what credentials I possess. I believed this was the correct path. Though I still believe it was the right choice, there's a lesson I gleaned from that table which continues to haunt me. Silence is a tactic, and like any strategy, its price becomes evident only after prolonged usage. I allowed myself to be diminished in the presence of many, as I chose modesty over self-expression. This decision was made repeatedly, even when the situation evolved, and those around me no longer questioned my decisions with good intentions, but instead assembled a case against me, utilizing my silence as proof. In 4 years, conversations at Thanksgiving dinners on I-10, kitchen chats that avoided deeper topics, I unknowingly crossed a line between humility and obliteration. A business card in the bin made things clear, not because it was heartless, but because it was conspicuous. For the first time, what had been subtly progressing became glaringly apparent to everyone in that room, including me and Bertram rummaging through the bin, not for my sake, not even intentionally, just because he spotted useful information and grabbed it. This, too, became clear. The most beneficial action I took in that house was not self-defense. It was waiting as the right person perceived what they needed to see, and the rest fell into place on its own. Last spring, Akafa requested I present Bertram's case anonymously at our departmental conference, formatted as a technical case study on post-traumatic syringomyelic management. Kayla initially drafted it, which was well written. I made some suggestions, and she revised it before we submitted it to Journal of Neurosurgery, Spine, in September. It was accepted with minor modifications in November. I'm not sharing this to boast. I'm sharing because of the events that unfolded the week of acceptance. While at my desk, I received an email from the journal, and as I sat there amidst diplomas on the wall, imaging on my screens, and patient consultation notes stacked on my desk, I reminisced about a Thanksgiving table in Beaumont, Texas, a discarded pile of business cards, and a man who fished one out, and I pondered, this is what I dedicate myself to. This is what I've consistently done, regardless of if the room was aware or not. I retrieved my phone and dialed Bertram. He answered on the second ring. I informed him that the paper had been accepted. He inquired, "Is that favorable?" I responded, "Extremely so." He concurred, "Good." After a brief pause, he added, "You know, Darcy's mother still avoids me at church." I chuckled. It was an authentic laugh which caught me off guard. "I'll consider that a victory," I said. And that, I believe, is where this narrative concludes, not with a dramatic shift, not with anyone apologizing or a public confrontation or a moment when the room finally grasped what they had been facing. Just a man and his patient on the phone, a study published, a hand that moves without shaking, and the silent, enduring understanding that you bear what you carry whether or not those around you recognize it. That suffices. If this narrative resonated with you, if you've ever found yourself in a situation where others dismissed you before you could speak, I invite you to share your experience. Post your thoughts below, recounting the moment and its impact, whether it was the price of silence or the consequences of speaking out. I read each one carefully.